Karen was alone at home when she was maliciously robbed. The thieves were in and out in moments but took more than £2,000. By the time she realised, both they and her money were long gone. All she can remember was responding to an email from what she thought was her bank, asking her to confirm her security details. That was all the invitation the criminals needed.
You can't see cybercrime, but there are ways to avoid it. At Barclays, we'll never ask you to confirm your security details by email.
Very sorry about that. I apologise profusely. Peter Hitchens is here, however, still here. He was here last week with Kevin O'Sullivan, sitting in for me, doing a great job. Peter, very good morning to you.
Morning.
I'm delighted to see that nothing has changed in my absence and that the world is still as mad as it was when I left.
If not madder.
If not madder. Not to wit, I would have to say, that they now want to rename the Brecon Beacons because apparently beacon is a word which does not fit in with the climate.
Well, apparently it will encourage people to light fires.
It will.
Thereby
yes,
creating
because of course
global heating.
Yes.
I have to say, that took me by surprise this morning. I thought, this is the higher ludicrousness is here again.
It is mad. I was talking to my sister last night, who lives in America, and we were just talking generally about how mad the world has become and how ridiculous it has all become, and that you actually have to ask questions of people which they can't answer, yes, such as, what do you think a woman is?
Yes, but somebody said this morning, what is it, Colville in Leicestershire will presumably have to change its name. Because
yes.
It will otherwise encourage people to burn.
Well, exactly. And Burns Night, of course.
And Burnley.
And Burnley.
And Blackburn.
And
They're
Blackburn.
all in trouble.
It's a bad thing, isn't it? It's going to be...
are they having us on? You can never really tell.
Well, as they said, and I think I said this last time I saw you, that, you know, there were no real good April Fool's jokes this year because the actual reality of the world is so mad that you can't
they were
spoof a
complete
story.
flops. There wasn't a one that worked.
No.
You couldn't. You kept thinking, well, this might be true.
Yeah.
The last one I remember that really got me was quite a good one, the Daily Mail, about submarines going up the Thames.
Oh, yeah.
I can't...
But again, you wouldn't disabuse that one,
no.
would you? You'd go, well, I could see that, possibly.
Actually, yeah, you would.
Well...
You can't get submarines up the Thames, I promise you.
Well, you probably can't, but, you know, there's a lot of places you can't get submarines.
No.
I mean, I remember when they crashed a submarine into one of the lochs up in Scotland.
Yes.
It was a sort of a relatively new sailor who was in charge of steering it, and he managed to clatter it into the side of the loch.
Yeah, but my favourite was when both the French and the British independent nuclear deterrents crashed into each other somewhere off Spain, I think.
Yes, it is all terrible, isn't it?
You can just imagine the shouts.
Susan's asking how you crash a submarine. Well, you crash it into the side of the loch, you know.
You can crash anything if you
want
to. Anyway,
really
here we go. How we got from the Brecon.
The one thing I'm sorry
I'm going to carry on calling them.
I'm going to continue to carry
them. As a matter of principle.
Yes, absolutely right.
And very beautiful they are too.
I managed to rile the Welsh over the weekend because I was partially tongue-in-cheek suggesting that Wales wasn't a country. And to prove it, I said, I've got a Welsh passport here, and I put a picture up of a British passport, which, of course, doesn't mention Wales at all, but that's the passport. Well,
then you have, I'm afraid, the other problem, a lot of people claim they have English passports and they don't have...
Well, people said to me, thinking that I was an English nationalist, well, then England's not a country either. I said, correct.
Well, that's
and
true.
neither is Scotland.
It isn't.
The only country is the United Kingdom.
I have to say, I am completely in sympathy with the revival of the Welsh language. I think it's great. It would be a tragedy if it was wiped out. I think all these things should be kept. That's great.
But should it be part of the national curriculum, though?
Well, there's a different matter, I think. But I think it's very important that languages and cultures this kind of kept alive. And I think we shouldn't knock.
I don't have a problem with the Welsh Language Act at all. But the problem is that it costs more money. Because everything they produce in the Senedd...
Consider how much money we spend on total rubbish.
Well, I did...
Keeping the Welsh language alive, by comparison, is really quite small.
Well, I suppose so, but unfortunately that's an argument that I can't in any way support, because that's what everybody says. It's like when people go, why don't you give another 100 billion to the NHS? It's only a small drop in the ocean, after all.
No, but quite often when you learn of some council that has made several people redundant on £150,000 ago and then hired them again 6 weeks later,
yes.
I think that's all the tax I've paid for several years.
Well,
gone down the gurgler, and it makes me quite cross. But in comparison, I say, Welsh language, there's at least some good in that.
I get that. But also, given that Rishi Sunak was up this morning at 10 o'clock at the start of my show speaking about the importance of mathematics and how everybody after 16, it reminded me of that Woody Allen film where the dictator of the country in bananas, which was in South American Banana Republic, said that from now on, everyone who is under the age of 16, will now be 16. And it was kind of like that. He's going, you're going to have to learn maths after 16. You have to study it.
Yeah, but what worries me is the idea that the longer people stay at school and the longer they do things, the more they're supposed to learn. I think, looking back, that most of the important things I learned at school I'd learnt by the time I was 13. All the stuff that came on top was not.
Well, I like Jeremy Clarkson's.
But the rest of it was learnt in remedial classes at the University of Fleet Street.
Yes.
Over the past 40 years or so.
There's a great column by Jeremy Clarkson yesterday, I don't know if you read it in the Sunday Times.
I'm afraid not.
In which he said, basically, unless you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, don't worry about your exams because they don't matter. And basically he said that all the people he's hired in the years that he has been hiring people, he's hired because they either had a decent pair of shoes or they answered some questions quite well in an interview.
That may be true, but I do know people who have suffered needlessly because they haven't had certain qualifications.
Yeah.
I think big bureaucracies will often say, we're not paying you anymore,
well,
we're putting you up a grade, if you can't show the particular piece of...
One of the reasons I was never able to get a job at the BBC, shortly before they gave me one later on, was because I didn't graduate from university. I didn't have a degree, so I couldn't apply for any jobs.
No, ridiculous.
As a radio journalist.
I mean, the graduates, the insistence on graduates in journalism has been a great blow, because there's an awful lot of the best journalists who never went near a university.
Of course. Because they came up through the local paper system, which no longer exists. But going just back to Rishi Sunak and his mathematics, I had a series of questions ready for him. For example, what percentage of my income is taken up by my new electricity bill? Which I'm not sure whether he could answer. Or indeed, how many strike days will it take before the economy collapses altogether?
Well, my favourite question, of course, is how much inflation did you cause while you were Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Yeah. If he's so good at maths...
Why has my cup of coffee become so fantastically expensive?
If he's so good at maths...
Because Rishi Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Why are we
It's not maths he was bad at.
No.
It's politics.
Yeah, well...
Which is how he became Prime Minister. That's
indeed. Shall we talk about Joe Biden? One of the things I'm sorry I missed was Joe Biden's visit. He visited a place that you've spent an awful lot of time in, you know very well. And the funny thing is because I know you so well now, as soon as I saw the picture of him with Jerry Adams, I thought of you.
Of course.
And I thought, well, I wonder what Peter Hitchens thinks
Jerry
of
Adams
this.
is my great friend. I have pictures of myself with Jerry Adams, but they're not so friendly.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it was absolutely fascinating to see the different ways in which he behaved south and north of the Irish border, which, of course, in the minds of most Irish Republicans, doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist, right.
But I think it would be fair to say that Joe Biden was a bit of an Irish Republican, but there was also some fascinating formal behaviour. The presidential limousine, while it was in Belfast, flew two flags on the bonnet. One, the flag of the United States, the other, the presidential standard. As soon as it reappeared south of the border, it was flying the Stars and Stripes and the Irish tricolour.
Right.
And so you would think, wouldn't you, that it would have been proper for it to fly the Union Jack when it was in the United Kingdom.
You would have thought.
In Northern Ireland, but it didn't.
Right.
And interestingly, when George W. Bush was in Northern Ireland, I think 2003, his car flew the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes at the same time.
Right.
And I believe Barack Obama did the same on I think a G7 visit a few years ago. But even more fascinating, when Bill Clinton was over in 1998, he didn't fly the Union Jack, and also his advance team either didn't know what they were doing or deliberately sent him up the Falls Road. There's a lovely picture of him driving past the old Sinn Féin offices up there, which you probably remember, which have now been replaced by much nicer ones, I have to say. But he's not flying it. So I think that what you see here is, particularly among Democrats, that doesn't apply to Obama, obviously, there is a feeling they don't really recognise United Kingdom sovereignty over Northern Ireland anymore.
Yes.
And they're not going to bother to show it. But I'd be very interested if anybody can come up with a proper protocol explanation which covers all the instances I've mentioned of how it was done. But it wasn't a state visit in the Republic of Ireland. It was an official visit, as far as I can establish, so it doesn't have any particular...
Well, one of the things that Rishi Sunak supposedly offered Joe Biden was a state visit, wasn't it? Because he's not coming to the coronation.
No.
He did decide to go to Ireland, but I also liked your kind of description of previous presidents who have always claimed, haven't they, that they've got some kind of Irish heritage. Almost all of them have got. I mean, even all the way back to Ronald Reagan, I think, claimed he was Irish.
I think in some cases they do, but in the case of Joe Biden, of course, they also have British heritage. But there is no English-American lobby in the United States. There's no English-American vote. Well, there's a very strong Irish-American lobby. A lot of people think that they have Irish roots in America. You know, I suppose. One of the problems about the United States, it's so vast you have to have something to cling to as an identity. One of the big things used to be, it's probably gone by now, in American big cities, newsagents would have stands of all the local papers.
Yeah.
From all over the country that people would buy because they really identified with the place they went to high school in.
Right.
But they also identify with these classifications, Italian-American, Irish-American.
Yeah.
The Irish-American one is very strong, even if in many cases probably their ancestors were Protestants.
Yeah.
They still go off on the Patrick's Day marches.
Right.
And Irish-America is very rich as well. The insurance business, for instance, is very strongly Irish.
Yeah.
And they were very influential with Clinton. And this is why we got...
And that kind of stemmed all the way back to the Kennedys, didn't it?
It goes... The Kennedys were of course, because they came from Massachusetts, where it's extremely strong, were, of course, very mixed up with it. But it's Clinton, who was about as Irish as I am, and was less interested in Ireland than I am, I think, probably,
Right.
nonetheless made pledges to Irish America when he got elected, which he didn't keep. And then they came back to him after the midterms and said, Mr. Clinton, you're not doing as you asked. And that was when he gave Jerry Adams the visa,
Yes,
from
and he
which
came to the White
everything
House.
else that's happened since has flowed.
Yeah. And so what happens now? Because does Biden's visit, if you say it proves that maybe they don't now recognise, Democrats recognise Northern Ireland as part of the UK...
Well, they don't, do they?
how significant is that?
Well, in the end, see, what happened, and this is what people...
I see Hillary Clinton's there today, by the way.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me. But what happened in 1998 was that Northern Ireland became, and I use the word advisedly, a provisional part of the United Kingdom. One referendum can switch it from British to Irish rule, and that's all. That referendum can be held every 7 years.
Right.
If it doesn't come up with the result, the right result. That is, if the wrong result would be that people voted against United Ireland, then it can be held again. If they vote for a United Ireland, it can't be held again. So it's a ratchet. It's not. It's not. It looks fair and democratic, but actually it's a divide.
And I'm told the reason we haven't had one referendum yet is that they don't think they'll win it.
They're biding their time. I think that the time will come, and all kinds of things, particularly the health service, need to be sorted out before it'll be an easy thing to do. But I think there's very little doubt that sooner or later it will come. And the other thing that will mean is that the political party which will then dominate all 32 counties of Ireland will be Sinn Féin. Which I think is quite a serious thing. I worry about Ireland under a Sinn Féin government, and I think that people should be much more concerned about that. But I think that will be the inevitable consequence of it.
Yeah, I think you may be right. Peter Hitchens is here. We'll come back. We've got to talk about Ukraine, and we've got to talk about whether the SAS are there, and if they are, what are they doing? This is TalkTV. Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here in TalkTV. I was just talking to Peter Hitchens about my trip to France, where I stayed actually in the Calvados region. We were just saying, did you manage to get some Calvados? The answer is yes. I didn't go around a Calvados, sort of bottling area or anything like that. But the wine and the Calvados, the cider actually is very good.
It's very good cider.
Cidre. We were just talking about visiting Omaha Beach and seeing incredible, just walking on that beach and knowing what happened there.
Yeah, and how young.
And I was there with my two sort of teenage sons, and I said certainly to the older one, who was 18, you would have been here in 1944.
Yeah.
And it's quite chilling, really.
It's very moving. The cemeteries there are impossible not to be moved by.
Yeah, they really are. Which brings us on to Ukraine. You wrote about it this weekend, and the revelation that came from the leaked documents over in America that the SAS are there.
Well, it's not a revelation, really. It's because I think almost all of us would have assumed this was so over a long period. But assuming it's so and seeing it in a leaked document are two different things, and there it is, and therefore it makes it now discussable, both in the media and in Parliament. And I think it should be. Because just imagine if some British Special Forces soldier was captured by the Russians, the political, diplomatic consequences of that. Or imagine, actually, if they were killed. I also mentioned this extraordinary incident which is supposed to have happened over the Black Sea, where a British reconnaissance surveillance aircraft was allegedly shot at by a Russian jet, which only failed to shoot it down because its missile failed. What would have happened if the missile had not failed? We're very much on the edge of things here. These have become acts of war. And since this country is a member of NATO, if we found ourselves at war with Russia, then it would involve the whole of Europe in war with Russia. Well, the consequences of that are so huge.
Although
it should be being discussed.
Yes.
what I mainly ask is for, because what generally happens if I try to discuss this, people say, oh, you're just a Russian propagandist, you traitor. Well, I should point out to them that down all the centuries, the principal trick of the tyrant has been to classify any dissent as treachery. And the principal folly of people has been to believe this trick. We have to have, in a free country, discussions of where and when and why we go to war. These people who are being sent into these places, these are obviously the sons, brothers, husbands of people living here. Also, their training, their equipment, everything about them has been paid for by the British taxpayer. The consequences of what they do will be felt by the citizens of this country. What is Parliament for, if not to discuss matters of this kind? And yet, is there a single member of Parliament on either side of the House who's prepared to raise it?
No.
I think there should be. Isn't
it interesting that it's sort of post-COVID that we've reached this point where, you know, dissent in Parliament, particularly, is not really wanted.
It was never wanted.
National security, you know, sticker on something, that's the end of that.
It was never wanted, but there were plenty of people who were prepared to provide it. I particularly remember the Scottish Labour MP Tam Dalyell himself, who'd been a national serviceman, who knew a lot about the military from personal experience, and who would pursue very doggedly things which were embarrassing to the government. And actually, Tam was a national treasure. He was a very important part of the Constitution. But when he retired and died, he was not replaced, and nobody seemed particularly anxious to replace him. I think there ought to be somebody sitting there now in the House of Commons who should think, this is a vacancy which I need to fill. Let's see you do it, because it's an important part. If we don't discuss these things in Parliament, we're not a democracy.
And do you think it's because of the just the paucity of talent in parliamentary circles these days? Because one of the things, for example, that we do know is that Ukrainian troops are being trained in the UK, and they've admitted that.
It is slightly different, though, isn't it?
It is.
I myself, I think it should be discussed. But having Ukrainians come here is one thing. Sending our troops there is a very different thing because of the danger in which it places them. But I think the big difference, actually, has been in the way that members of Parliament are chosen. They used to be, in both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, chosen much more by the local party. Now what happens is there's huge centralisation of both parties, and people are parachuted into winnable seats over the heads of the locals. And to get parachuted in, to get the blessing of central parties, you now have to be pretty much approved of, and therefore you have to toe the line. So the number of maverick individuals with their own points of view and their own readiness to strike out in different directions, who will get to be MPs, is very small. And it's also possible for independents to get elected to Parliament now. And people say, well, what about the man in the white suit, what's his name, who was elected?
Oh, Martin Bell.
Martin Bell. But people forget that he was elected because New Labour and the Liberal Democrats withdrew from the seat to give him a clear run. He wasn't independent. Of course, when he started kicking up a bit about things that annoyed New Labour, they turned on him.
Yes. And that's the trouble, isn't it? Because we hear all the time that people are fed up with the two-party system, but there isn't really an alternative at the moment.
People will, as you said, don't vote. It only encourages them. If people will continue when the parties placed before them their own vetted candidates in safe seats, if people continue to play this game, they shouldn't be surprised at what they get. I've often thought that mass abstention is a much underused political weapon. If you held an election and nobody came, and all the MPs had about 250 votes from their friends and relations, and nobody else had voted for them, they would have no power. They'd have no legitimacy. If voters went on strike, and then we could sack these two dead political parties. And what this country needs is two new parties, a different kind of left-wing party, sort of Polly Toynbee type of party, and a different kind of patriotic, socially conservative party, quite like me. And the two parties of that kind would represent what worries people in this country much more. I do very much believe there should be two parties, and they should differ, but they shouldn't be the parties we have, which are kept alive by dodgy billionaires and by government subsidy, and by broadcasting rules, which, particularly on the BBC, which, if you are an established party, give you an unfair share of airtime.
Well, I suppose to balance it all up, you might end up with one less party at the next election. Generally speaking, with the SNP disappearing up its own backside.
Certainly, they do seem.
They're trying very hard
to solve some very, very serious problems, don't they? But I wonder whether they can pull themselves together. And the thing, Scottish nationalism is still immensely powerful. Yeah. It's just a party. Well, maybe Alex Salmon will come back.
He may well
Alba party.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the door is wide open for him to do so.
It is, isn't it? I wonder. I do wonder. He has a lot of revenge he must want to take.
Oh, I think so. He's taking it very slowly at the moment and being very coy about it all, but we'll see. We may talk to him later this week. Peter, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, back, of course, at the weekend, and possibly before in the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, and back with us next Monday.
Not next Monday.
Oh, you're not here next Monday?
No, I'm afraid I have to give you
Are you going away?
My lips are sealed.
OK, he can't tell us where, as long as it's not Ukraine. We'll see you after this. Coming up, we're going to be talking, of course, about a great many things, including net zero, including Scotland, what's going on up there, and also Simon Calder is going to be around, because I'm going to put him to task and say, why you keep saying it's all about Brexit, that people can't go to France, because it ain't true. This is TalkTV.